morning,
Gonna get it.
everyone. Or good afternoon, like Sue said. I think we're ready to kick off. I am Gabby, head of global marketing for SMR, and today I'm quite excited about this community circle because it's a very special one. As we all know, this one is really dedicated on the Data Privacy Day that's happening now on the 28th. And for that, we have an amazing guest, which is also part of SMR, Claudio Gennaro. As you all know, he is our legal and public affairs manager. And of course, I could not go ahead without mentioning Sue, our amazing host, head of training and development of the Research Society. We're already running a little bit late, but I'm just going to quickly run over the housekeeping rules. Please, this is a community circle, so please do engage through chat or unmute yourselves, raise your hand, talk. I'm sure Claudio and Sue will really appreciate that. But of course, if you are not contributing, please do mute your mic so that we can make the session as efficient and exciting as possible. Without further ado, please, Sue, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Gabby. We were talking earlier about one of the challenges or interesting things about privacy in this part of the world is, how many different countries are involved in Asia Pacific. Claudio will have a much easier job when he talks to people about North America later on today. And it might be helpful for Claudio, if you're happy to, just type in the chat what country you're from, and that'll give us a bit of an idea of, some of the areas that we have people coming from. But Claudio, tell us a little bit about Privacy Day and why we're here today and why we've picked privacy to talk about at this AI community circle.
Sure, I Sue, everyone. Thanks. So first of all, I'm really thankful to Sue, Gabby, Ray for organizing this community circle and focusing on Privacy Day. That's something that we do every year. Every year we decide to spend one day reflecting on privacy and data protection. And that's not something we came up with. That's actually an International Privacy Day. In Europe, we also call it Data Protection Day. It's an international event. It occurs every 28th of January. This year it fell during a weekend, so we decided to do it today instead. And it's currently observed by almost 50 countries around the globe. It doesn't fall on the 28th of January randomly, but it's the day that the Convention for the Protection of Individuals with regard to automatic processing of personal data was opened for signature by the Council of Europe. It's an initiative that was initiated by the Council of Europe and then it's spread in more than 50 countries around the globe. As you know, for SMR, for the profession, privacy and data protection is really important. It's a central key of anything that we do. Those principles are reflected in the ICC SMR code, are reflected in the guideline and in many other pieces of guidance that we share and that we offer helpful for any player in the industry, such as data protection checklist. So I thought it was a really good opportunity to stop for one day and reflect on what privacy and data protection means for the industry. How do they look like in 2024 in light of all the technological advancements, and what the role of the researcher is today with regards to privacy and data protection, how it evolved and how it will look like looking in the future. I hope that sets the context for the conversation. Sue.
Thanks, Claudio. We were sort of initially saying we're interested in global perspectives, and like people often talk about what's happening in Europe, what's happening in North America, and then people often summarize to what's happening in Asia Pacific, which is actually many countries operating in a regional area. At that top global level, what are some of the the key things that are common between the various regions, and what are some of the key differences? I imagine you see a lot of that in your role at SMR.
Sure. I would say that on this regard, Europe still maintains its leadership when it comes to guidance in data protection. GDPR today is still the central text, is the text that provides the wider framework when it comes to data protection and privacy. And we see many legislations worldwide passing laws on this topic, taking inspiration by GDPR and aligning the legislation to comply with GDPR. Compliance to GDPR today, it still means compliance with most national legislations in the world. However, we see some differences in approach. We know that the European model varies from other models in North America. In North America and Australia, data protection frameworks attacked from a very different angle, from a very specific angle. Most of the time, legislation are not do not focus on data protection as such, or by providing an open framework for compliance, but are more narrow and activity specific. So we will see more bills on data protection in healthcare, data protection in education. It's a different approach than what we see in Europe, where we have one bill that aims at covering data protection as such, more a wider angle. From a researcher perspective, it means probably doing a little bit more research, seeing what are the bills, what are the legislation that actually covers specific roles, specific applications, specific researchers. But again, GDPR still maintains its leadership position as the global compass for data protection today.
Great.
But I'm also very curious of hearing what other attendees think, if there is any national legislation that we should be aware of, or any initiative, for example.
Yes, and of the people who've dropped in their countries, we've got a couple of people from Australia, and then we've got people from Germany, the Netherlands, and Brazil. I'm sure there's people from other countries. I suppose, does anybody have either any questions or any comments they wanted to make, either by dropping them into the chat or by just unmuting and chipping into the conversation? Or if you've got questions that you'd like to ask Claudio about sort of that global perspective and, you know, where your country or where other things fit in that framework, now's an ideal chance to ask an expert. I think somebody's unmuted their mic, which might mean they're ready to chip in.
That would be me. Hi, Claudio. It's Lisa here from Australia. I'm also the Professional Standards Officer for the Research Society. I guess from an Australian perspective, we've got the Privacy Act as well as the Australian Privacy Principles. And the great thing is actually our code covers quite a lot on best practice of, well, the basics of the privacy. And yeah, and as long as our members follow that code, they're pretty much on the right path. So we very much encourage it wholeheartedly, just so that they keep themselves and also the respondents safe, to put it simply.
And I suppose the other thing that's happening, Lisa, this year in Australia is a review of some of the legislation.
Yes, bated breath. We're waiting for the government update to the APPs. I keep getting asked, and having spoken to our legal counsel in our building, we're thinking March or May. Why it's an M month in my mind or their mind, I don't know, but waiting for it. So after that, there'll be a review of the Research Society code as well.
Hi, Lisa. Ray here. Is the perspective, and James and Sue, and I'm sure some other people too, is the perspective in Australia that your privacy approach is modelled on GDPR, or is it more a perspective that you have an Australian model?
It's more an Australian model. Having said that, I'm fairly certain that if not the government, at least businesses are looking at the GDPR as well, because let's face it, we all work globally, so that has a massive impact. Because I believe the APPs came in before the GDPR. Let's check that. Ooh.
I'm almost certain that they predate that, maybe not the exact current ones, but
no.
So we need somebody who's not in Australia to chip in with some questions now.
So Ichinose-san, Norika-san, konnichiwa. What about the picture in Japan?
Hi. So I think no action we have yet in Japan. Sorry.
Okay.
We are very interested in the progress of the EU committee about the AI Act.
Okay, thank you very much, Ichinose-san. It's good to see
Sorry.
you.
Which is a nice segue, given that we are, this is one of the AI community circles. Claudio, most of the stuff that, we've talked about thus far, existed before we started to talk about AI. What things are on your radar, when you start to think about privacy and data protection and start to think about the rise of AI and researchers using it more, and also businesses, generally using it more? What are kind of some of either your key concerns or the things that, SMR is really thinking about, in that intersection of, AI, data protection and privacy?
Well, as you know, SMR is working very hard right now through its professional standards committee on a document which is called 20 questions for providers of artificial intelligence services in artificial intelligence, for market research, which will be, I believe, the main guidance in that sense. It aims at guiding researchers, asking themselves the right questions and asking the service providers the right questions when it comes to compliance with, of course, applicable laws, but also the highest standards that we should strive for as members of SMR. Said that, obviously, the EU Artificial Intelligence Act has been on our radar for a year or more, and it will be still on our radar. But we must not forget that AI as such, it might be fueled by personal data. So everything that we've built so far, all the best practices, all the guidance that we have adopted so far, they remain in place. The data protection checklist, I recommend going on smr.org and downloading it with something that we updated recently last year. That remains valid. The entire ICC-SMR international code remains valid because it's set in stone some of those guiding principles that, despite any technological advancement, they remain in place. The ICC-SMR code has been drafted in the 70s, if I'm not wrong. Technology was very different. Today, it's still applicable, and maybe I'm a bit optimistic, but I believe it will remain applicable for some decades to come. So definitely the EU Artificial Intelligence Act, it's something that we are looking at, especially from the research perspective, obviously. So making sure that those tenets, those principles included, do not stifle research. But that's something that we do with any legislation. We also see many other bills around the world aiming at regulating AI, North America, mostly of them, and in the UK. But again, those guiding principles that guide data protection and privacy for the profession, they remain valid, they remain applicable. And what I believe is important, or what I believe is a good advantage for our members and those who apply the code and the guidelines, is that the compliance process is already built on very solid ground. If you comply with the ICC-SMR code, if you comply with or if you follow the guidelines of the data protection checklist, you're building your compliance program on very solid grounds. So application of other bills, of other legislative frameworks will come easier than how will be otherwise. What I would maybe like to ask is does your organization perceive data protection, all the requirements of data protection and privacy, to slow down your work, to slow down research, or do you see it as an additional asset in your portfolio of services?
I see it as it's not additional, it's a must. It's part of our service. I don't think it slows it down at all. It's the first thing in terms of when we have a new starter come on board. It's pretty much where we point them. So, you know, I work in the online space. There's no question that it's very important.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that's the benefit of, you know, various codes and guidelines and things that you know, shouldn't just be thinking about research and then add a bit of standards or bit of something on at the end. You know, it does have to be built in, you know, to the design of projects, you know, into the design of how you conduct business. And that's, I, you know, think one of the really strong benefits of, you know, the tools and things that we're talking about, be they codes or fact sheets or checklists, you know, they help you get it right all the way through. So imagine, Claudio, some people are quite excited by the idea of, you know, the whether they are the 20 questions or the 25 questions, and maybe you end up with a slightly different number by the time they use it, because many people would be familiar with that. The number of questions, I think, has changed over the years for, you know, buying online sample and things like that. Have you got a time frame for developing that? I know it's probably, you know, a work in progress, and you know, perhaps not exactly possible to say when.
It's in the making. I think it will be ready by the following couple of months. I don't think we have a date set in stone yet. We don't have a publication date yet, but it's in the making. I think it's in its final mile. I agree. Probably it will not be 20 questions. I hope there will be many more. And I also hope we remove that number from the title.
Excellent. Is there going to be any review of that if people wanted to provide input? Are you looking for people to, you know, stress test it, tell you where it works, where it doesn't work, or are you sort of more progressed than that?
Absolutely. I think you can find the initial draft on smr.org. Otherwise, please send me an email and I will be very happy to share it with you.
Okay, excellent. Is there anyone who's sitting quietly in the audience, kind of waiting for a chance to ask a question, and the rest of us are talking too much? We'll be quiet for a little while if you want to unmute and ask a question, or type something into the chat. Claudia and I are both keeping an eye on the chat, and I'm sure others are as well.
I've got a quick question. Since we're mostly talking about privacy, which aspects of AI relate specifically to privacy? So we know lots and lots about protection and not misinterpreting the data and being honest and all these sort of things. But what are the specific privacy related issues that are coming out around artificial intelligence?
I will just give my 2 cents, and then I will also hear other people's opinion. I think it's really hard to say yet. I think we still cannot grasp what the future implications of AI will be. I will go with the easy answer, which is amplification of biases and synthetic data. We know that the creation of synthetic data will play, or we have huge expectations for synthetic data, specifically in research, to amplify the research base. What we know is that synthetic data will need to be created on the basis of real data to be realistic, to be usable. Anonymization and pseudonymization will play a key role in the creation of this synthetic data from real data. So what I believe it would be among the key criticalities, the critical risk, is the re-identification of pseudonymized and anonymized data, which in the future, due to the quantum break that we always talk about, the possibilities of quantum computing of breaking encryption and breaking pseudonymization techniques and allowing faster re-identification of pseudonymized and anonymized data, might lead to serious consequences for the protection of the identity of the respondents. So I will go with the easy answer and say re-identification of anonymized data, but this is not even 1% of the possibilities. I don't think that we know that yet.
So to add my 1%, I think the one that is almost incidental in the legislation that the EU is looking at is regulating the use of things like emotional detection, facial recognition, all of the biometric non-question based techniques that we've been developing in the research world for the last 20 years, possibly even things like the galvanic skin responses, are going to come under this AI interpretation. And I wasn't expecting those sorts of things to be caught up in the AI brush. I could see why governments might look at them at some time, but that seems quite a distinct feature, that they're looking to regulate the use of automated techniques for facial recognition. And we use, for example, when we're testing TV commercials, systems that look at people's faces and interpret their emotions, so we don't have to trust their words. This is likely to fall very much under the aegis and the overview of the AI legislation, and that's perhaps something that people hadn't spotted. I guess it's another sort of privacy, the privacy of your internal thoughts and the privacy of your personal anonymity of not being recognized.
It's sort of that those kind of techniques that you're talking about, Ray, take us back to we used to talk a lot more about informed consent. Like, what actually are you consenting to if you've agreed to be videoed as part of something? Because a lot of people, might not necessarily take, into account some of those things.
I can try and give a very specific example, maybe very practical examples that might involve even everybody in this call today. So we have asked your consent to record this call. You've seen a consent box before, and we are recording the video of this call. So far, you've consented for your image being recorded and being stored within this call, within Teams. However, in the future, with AI techniques, with new AI softwares, we might be able to extract from these videos more information than just your facial expression. It might be data concerning your background, your emotions, as Ray was saying, emotion recognition. There are so many information that can be extracted from the video, and that AI breakthrough will allow us to extract from the videos. Not allow us, because we won't do that, of course, but many information, even very private information, that can be extracted from videos and from everyone's faces. Have you consented to that as well when you consented your image being recorded? I don't think so, and that's something that the legislation will need to tackle, and we should do it before the legislation actually do it. We should issue what are the best practices and agree on how to properly safeguard respondents, even before that becomes a real concern.
DJ, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes, thank you. So my apologies. I joined this call very late and stuck in the traffic. So I might have missed some very great conversation at the beginning. But on this point, I want just to bring a different perspective, given that generative AI is now getting into multimodal, right? Audio, video, and voice synthesization, and kind of cloning of someone. So not only just one particular aspect of biometrics, but the entire person can be coming virtually, almost like mimicking, like almost real. Now, in the context of market research, I believe there are some implications when we bring synthetic data, this kind of generative AI, and almost getting into the possibility where it looks like real. Now, there are 2-3 sort of implication. One is obviously authenticity, whether the person is real or not, or that the person where you have cloned that person has given consent, yes or no. And then some of the outcome which is going to come from here, and then our clients are going to make decision. So I think there's another thing which, as Claire, you said at the beginning, that it is evolving and it is very difficult to say, really. And I think this whole generative AI is going to bring is a completely a new set of implications when it comes to data privacy and compliance.
Yeah. And I think this is not an original thought of my own. I think it comes from an Australian academic. This idea that, some of the things that happen, when they're small scale or slow scale, the consequences aren't as great. And one of the things that AI does is, put everything, people do on steroids, if you want a better expression. So if there's something, that it's a bit like, if you do something manually, you can only do it, the once or the twice. But, with AI, it can be done many, many times over. And that's where, some of the things you start to notice that, small things can have larger consequences.
Indeed.
If I can jump
yeah.
in, what
Please,
DJ
yeah.
said is really, that's really interesting, because I recently read that in a questionnaire that was circulated among participants to the World Economic Forum just a few days ago, and where, by the way, where SMR was present, misinformation was the number 2 issue that participants highlighted. Number 1 was climate change. Number 2 is misinformation and fake news. So my question would be, what do you think is the role of researchers to tackle this issue here?
Yeah, it's a very straightforward question, Gledu, and that's very difficult to answer in this context because how will you go and ensure that the information is authentic until you do some kind of verification? I don't know. I'm just thinking very loud. In the olden days, we used to have this what you call back check as part of our market research process, right? When we used to do face-to-face survey, and as part of our quality control, we used to do telephone back check, face-to-face back check, and all that. I don't know. It sounds like trivially over here whether we will bring those kind of randomly picked up cases and do really old style check to see whether this thing is authentic or not, whether the sample has been created authentic or not. It's very difficult to really go and check electronically, because today, in my view, everything in the value chain can be created by AI. So it is very difficult to say, I don't know which part is genuine and which is not. I don't know what other things.
Yeah, it's a really big question, and like one that we could, dig into quite deeply and talk about quite a lot. One thing, kind of think of, well, there are different ways of checking things. Like you give the example of, in like interviewing, where you would, like do a check back, or validate a percentage of interviews in quant surveys and things. There would be some opportunities for that, but then there were, other ways of checking, like when you talk about triangulation, can you look at the findings of a particular study and then, find an external source of information, that will support, that that's correct, or perhaps raise questions of, like, why is that different, to what's in, some other published data. So I suppose there are, good researchers will have to think about, what are the ways that you can, add support to other information, or potentially raise questions about other information.
Definitely. I think at macro level, researchers can definitely do sense check, whether something is looking right or not, or the previous knowledge can guide you. But Claudio's question is more about, I believe, is at micro level, where you are talking about respondent level, right? Whether respondent level data authentic or not. It is very difficult in my view, really. Given and it all goes back to your input, right? As we talked about sample sources. Now, sample sources, in my view, I think if one thing which we can do as researchers is to really become more conscious and also responsible about our input process, which is sampling sources, whether it is coming for online panel, panels or synthetic data, and how much we can put our hand on those things, right? Currently, even panels are also going like a manufacturing way, like production. So even one project is actually being completed by a number of panels. Now, what is the interplay of those panels? That's number one question from the quality side. And even though you bring synthetic data now as panel source, sample source, you add another dimensions to it. So I think if you can just really, as your question is, what researchers can do, I think it's a good idea to really become more responsible towards our basic foundational process, which is sampling. That one thing which you can at least do, in my view.
I think that's a really good point, and there's probably other people on the line who can answer this question of, for a researcher buying sample, how easy or difficult is it to be able to ask those questions of your provider and get the sort of answers that you need?
It should be very easy. It's not a taboo question. You should be able to ask it of anyone and any person in that organization. They should be able to tell you. Yeah. They should have the 35 questions now, isn't it? 34.
But
Oh my gosh.
What we see from the Global Data Quality Initiative is there is a lot of bad data out there. And the various associations, TRS, MRS, our Insight Association ourselves at SMR, SampleCon, all sorts of people are trying to tackle this problem. But we do know that the research industry is selling a lot of data which is not fit for use. Now, some of that is fraudulent, and some of that is badly designed questions, and some of that is surveys that are too long and things like this. It's multiple reasons, but there's a whole set of factors in there already. And as we move into more AI, the big hope is that we can use AI to spot fraudulent data, that we can use AI to spot respondents that are not engaged and are not giving us good information. The downside is the frauds could be using AI to give increasingly realistic questions, and we need to have just keep fighting a battle that we are not actually selling fake responses. And that is one side of the problem. The other side of the problem is that there are companies out there who are doing fake polls. There's been a major problem in Japan now, I think, Ichinose-san, for a couple of years, of these fake polls who will promote your product as the #1 product, and there have been questions in Parliament about it. There have been for many years problems in the USA with fake polls promoting their candidate, and push polling as part of the process there. So we have actual bad players in the industry, not in our industry, but they look like they're in our industry if you're further away. And then we have politicians who have always called any poll they didn't like a fake poll. And this often is some of the more outspoken, particularly right of centre, but not exclusively, sometimes left of centre, who simply object. And there are politicians who try to ban polls around the world because they call them fake polls. No, what they say is they call them fake polls. What they really mean is they don't help them, politicians. So I think there's lots of different aspects to this fake or not authentic that we need to be aware of, and some of them are inside our industry. And I think looking at the Global Data Quality Initiative and thinking about how that's going to have to tackle the AI related things is a really important thing.
Ray, sorry, can I ask you, do you think that synthetic data would amplify this issue, or synthetic data might be used or even weaponized by political opponents to poison the result of polling ahead to elections?
Yeah, so it can be done both ways. one way of detecting that something is not correct would be to create a synthetic data set and say, could those responses that we're seeing in this poll have come from real data? This is something which has been done with academic results, been done with studies of animal migrations over long periods of times. And synthetic data in those cases isn't usually done by creating clones. It's done by creating a synthetic model per se. And so things like that could be used to analyze whether that range of speeds in the of responses is credible, whether that level of diversity is possible. So we could use synthetic data as part of the defense system. But equally, you could, I could set up a system where I generated 1,000 synthetic responses, and I then sold that to my client as real responses. And it is very unlikely that most of the people that I deal with would be able to tell that what I'd sold them was 1,000 synthetic responses. It might even be as good as real data, but that is not the point. If I've sold it as real data, it has to be real data. So those sort of things. And what I think the EU has almost got in its mind, and what maybe we as an industry have in our mind, are some sort of watermarking principles, where if you create synthetic data, it's watermarked as synthetic data. So anybody with the right tools can say, oh, right, I can see this is synthetic data, I can use it for this. But they're not going to be fooled into thinking that it's real.
Yeah, Ray, I agree with you. I think there was an article which I was reading about, it was in the broader context of generative AI, generated content where watermarking has been, suggested. And I think it's really great idea because we all need to acknowledge that data is going to be there. It's going to be used in various scenarios. In some scenarios, it's required. In some scenarios, it is a commercial reason for that or whatever reasons. But as long as we agree that, yeah, if it is intelligent generated data, let's have labeled it as watermark or something which can be identifiable. That will really bring a lot of transparency and at least trust into the process and data. I think it's a general sometimes question come to in my mind that now as like leading bodies of the industry, we need to now start coming up with some kind of framework for synthetic data, even though it is not coming from the regulators or whatever. But our initial thoughts, what industry, because from our advice perspective, we need to just put down a few things. Hey, let's do this 1, 2, 3. If at all you're going synthetic data way. That's very important.
My question here is, because of this need to verify, to add further verification of this data that are used for political polling purposes, would it create a case or could it legitimize longer embargo times for pollsters?
I think the embargo, I think it's a separate issue. Mostly the embargo times relate to politicians not wanting the polls to affect the results. So normally politicians still want to be able to do their polling so that they know where they should put their resources and how they should deploy the various things that they can pull levers on to help their thing. So they will tend to want data collection and private reporting to continue. There is a separate issue around when the embargo is, and just for those from different countries, you may not know that around the world there are lots and lots of different rules about when polls have to stop. So I think France is something like the last week you can't publish an opinion poll. In the UK, you can't publish exit polls during voting day. And I think most people would think that's probably a good thing. But not the French one tends to be not thought of as generally a good thing. I think that if there are scandals, politicians will use those to make their case. I mean, that is always been the situation. Something goes wrong, you say, right, great, we can use this to our advantage.
I think there's in my view there is a kind of merit in saying that there's if somebody is doing synthetic modeling, you know, that if you go from a statistics perspective and when you're doing extrapolation, and if you go by the theory of generating synthetic data instead of in data which implies to the input side of it, I would rather say that I would do synthetic generation on the go, where I have some models which will help it to make it more robust from the confidence side. That would be far more better and believable approach in my view, rather than we refer to synthetic data, which is the input data. I think what is sounding from this discussion is the concern is more from the input side, right? The what we take as sample as synthetic data, rather than during the process side, where sometimes statistical models require that kind of robustness, reinforcement. So is again is understanding which part of synthetic we are trying and talking, and where is the concern really.
I mean, that makes, when I start thinking about this, DJ, and like we sort of tend to say synthetic data and use it like it's a term that means one thing, but in actual fact we're often talking about lots of different things that are in some ways similar but sometimes quite different. Are we talking about statistical processes? Are we talking about I think Claudio is sort of alluding to at other points, are we using it to, say, anonymize data in some sorts of ways? But then we have, like you'll see articles, press releases, things on social media about, like we're doing, AI generated personas, and so are we talking about sometimes synthetic respondents and synthetic data? And, I would see those as being, kind of different things. And I think for people who are starting to get to grips with this, you almost need, like a typology or some definitions, or, like some, ways of explaining that, like, yes, this is one thing, but it's actually built up of, like lots of different things that, could be created, in many different ways.
Is there an accepted definition of what synthetic data is in our industry? And are there best practices for the creation of synthetic data?
No, I think one thing that maybe we should move on quite quickly is a statement that if you're using synthetic data, you must say it's synthetic data, and you should try to watermark it. At the moment, we can't watermark everything because we don't have the tech. But I think that there is absolutely no agreement about what constitutes synthetic data, and we're do we have to retrofit it to some of the things we've been doing for years? So one of my favorite examples, if you do conjoint modeling, you are likely to be using hierarchical Bayes. Hierarchical Bayes generates a new data set from the data set you collected that enables you to get individual feedback from a level which you could not have collected. That is, by our new definition, undoubtedly synthetic data. We have never called it synthetic data. It's quite difficult to explain what it is to non-quant people, and even to some quant people. So I think that is kind of highlights there one area where synthetic might need to be retrofitted to something we've been doing quite commonly for a long, long time. We've also used a thing called data fusion, where you might take behavior study and you'll take media data and you ram them together to make a new data set based on linkages between them. And again, that is undoubtedly, by our new definition, synthetic data. And the companies that do that, the media-related companies, the lifestyle companies, are going to be worried that it will appear to devalue their product. So that again is going to be a concern. So I think our initial push should be, these sorts of things are synthetic. You should be labeling them if you are doing this, and if you can watermark them. So to give you an example of where synthetic data can help privacy and can help the industry, imagine that you've done a whole set of depth interviews, you've done some video interviews, all about some new tools for plumbers, so tradies in Australia, and you've got this data, you've got a great story. So you then, from the data you've collected, write a script using AI and say, could you summarize the people who really liked it, what they said? It writes a script. It then generates a video, set of video images. So it looks like it's a tradie talking about the responses. It's a really convincing story. It helps get the message across. That's great use of the tech. This is all stuff that's currently in use in advertising. It's currently in use in Hollywood, much to the dislike of the actors and the writers. So this is tech that exists. And provided you say that is synthetic, this is a constructed story, that is really useful in storytelling because it protects the privacy of all the people we actually interviewed. Their pictures, their faces are no longer being used. But if we don't say it's synthetic, and people are not going to want to use the word synthetic for that, they're going to want to use artistic creation or something much more imaginative and evocative. That I think is where those sorts of boundaries are going to be.
I mean,
Yeah,
that process, I was going to say, Ray, that is a sort of process that you could do without AI, though. You know, have a think about, you know, what the message out of your research is, and then, you know, have a video that's essentially a presentation device. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly, technically it's the same as writing a script based on what you did and then getting an actor to act out those roles. But that would cost a lot more and therefore is not very often done. Whereas when we move over to the AI version, it's really trivial to get to get AI scripts written and then AI voiceovers and AI actors. And that would be, provided you do it with informed receipt as opposed to informed consent, so people know what they're getting, it will be a very effective method of storytelling. And it's something that can then be used client side to pass this information along. But it's got to be done with some sort of watermarking, some sort of awareness, so we know what the difference is. And this is going to be true of movies, I think, in the future, that we are going to want to know that actually this is a synthetic Grace Kelly or Audrey Hepburn and not a real Audrey Hepburn.
I think we're all familiar with the concept of trademarking for pictures or videos or other multimedia content, but I fail to grasp what watermarking means for digital personas, for synthetic data. Could you maybe briefly elaborate on that?
So if we think about check bits that are used in communication, it may be that in the ID column of that data file, it has a characteristic that every single number has to have a check bit that says this is there. Could even be as simple as it must, in the future, all data files, respondent data files, should have an additional column to say, is it pure, so we get a 0, or is it processed and gets a 1? And that would be a simple way that all data files have this new column and everybody could then look at it at the data file level. And you could even then put in a checksum column that tells you that no columns have been added or deleted. So that again would be a relatively straightforward technical thing we could do. Add one column to say whether or not it's pure data, and another column, which is the checksum, which tells you that nothing has been added or deleted from the data file.
Some kind of a declaration of authenticity of the data.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing that you get in data transmissions, you get in when you play your CDs. If anybody still plays CDs, they've all got checksum systems for checking that the data is still there intact and so on. Those 3 characters that you have to type in when you use your credit card are a checksum in part for the other information you've entered. They know that it must add up to this combination of that. I think I'm going to patent the checksum synthetic data solution.
I mean, it's interesting because we're actually now kind of coming at this from 2 angles too. And I think we started with DJ, talking about, like looking at our inputs and stuff, which is probably something researchers are familiar with. We did talk about this when people started using big data, like what's the provenance of the data, how good is it for the purpose that you're about to use it? And then with generative AI, we have come at it from the other way too, of like what outputs are coming out of the project in terms of synthetic data or other sorts of processing that may have taken place. And that might be one of the big differences that we've not been used to. So I'm just looking at the time. We've got about 7 minutes left if we're going to be super on time and prompt. Is there anyone who's been sitting quietly in the background who's got a question that they'd like to ask, or even comments they want to make, or any sort of local information from their country that might be useful to pass on to the group, or even just put out there for Claudio to have a think about when he's thinking about what sort of things he needs to be considering as the year progresses.
Also, any disagreement is welcome.
Yes, disagreement is often good. I mean, it does feel like everybody's kind of at that starting point of thinking about things, and in many ways, there's like a lot more questions than there are answers. So it's kind of a good time to be putting any questions you have out there, because it does rather stimulate the discussion too. Ray and Claudio, you probably both go to the session that's in the APAC time zone, and then we'll later go to the one that's in the sort of European American time slot. Are there other issues that you think would come up with an audience, say, from Europe and America, that perhaps is less likely to come up in an Asia Pacific time slot when we're talking about things like AI and privacy and data protection?
When we talk about AI, I think the best quote here is from Socrates, which is, "I know to not know, not knowing." We don't know what the future holds for us when it comes to AI. We can just build on our current models. We can build upon our current AI, privacy and data protection frameworks, and build robust systems that may withstand my hold strong when it comes to new technologies and developments. I think synthetic data. We'll keep talking about synthetic data. That's something that we've been doing. For example, also during the AI forum in October. Synthetic data are really promising for the industry, but as we now discussed, they can also pose, as any other innovation, they can pose serious considerations for us to tackle in time. I would be really happy to report part of this conversation to our SMR Professional Standards Committee. I'm sure they will have a lot of ideas how we can tackle some of these issues. The watermarking, for example, may be a good piece of advice that we could give to researchers. And the 22 questions, is definitely a good answer, a good starting point for that. It will not be the final version. So we've been discussing about making it a living document. So making sure that this document remains up to date and is updated throughout the year. So that will be the first edition. That will be the first volume. Hopefully, will be more questions or less questions depending how you approach this document. But this issue will keep evolving, and we will keep evolving in our approach to tackle it properly.
So I think two things that may well crop up. The first is more about misuse of AI. So in the New Hampshire primaries, somebody was using AI generated chat bots to mimic Joe Biden's voice to ring people up and tell them not to go to the primaries. And it sounded just like Joe Biden was ringing you up, and it was plausible, and so on. So I think that is the first big example of something we've expected for a long time, but really being used in a very direct way. And possibly, given that we started this day talking about privacy and International Privacy Day, maybe the new court case, the new ruling in France against Amazon about over monitoring of staff at work. So they were monitoring, were they packing things too quickly, packing things too slowly? How many minutes were they doing this? How much movement were they doing? And all of these sorts of issues. And obviously there is a level of monitoring which is too intrusive. We've heard of issues in the past of monitoring toilet breaks and things like this as well. So Amazon has now been fined a very large amount of money in France for breaking human rights by removing too much privacy from its employees. And I think that is going to be an interesting battleground, and we're going to see employers like Elon Musk really running head into a lot of legislations in parts of the world where employees are treated as humans, which is kind of not what he would like the case to be. So I think we might see that in the European session.
How do you see that intersecting with research, though, Ray? Or do you see it intersecting with research? Things like the Amazon privacy case you just mentioned. Yeah.
Consent. I think consent. If people are being paid money to carry a device on their phone that records their activities, they've done that knowingly, and they're being fairly rewarded. I don't think many people are going to worry too much about it. And there's always been a balance. So people have had these devices on their watches and on their phones and on their computers for a long time. And the people who've set them up have usually had the good sense not to record. If they go to a porn site, they don't record it because originally they recorded it, then erased it. And that put them in a position of holding information that they didn't want to hold. So now most of those systems proactively do not record some types of activity. And I think that is one of the things they need to be aware of. Of course, you then run into the problem of if maybe this person committed a crime, what information do you hand over to the police becomes another issue. If you're tracked by one of the big data collection companies, what's the risk that the police are then going to say, can we have that information? And we're seeing a growing number of countries, including Australia, including the UK, who are seeking to make protests to save the planet significant terrorist criminal effects. And that might be the sort of data that the police forces would start to look for, say, were you there on these dates protesting against this? So I think that there are sometimes data we don't want to hold because we could end up compromising people's safety.
I suppose there might be some unintended consequences there too, if you say end up with a gap in people's web browsing history. Oh, stopped recording then, what does that mean?
Yeah, Absolutely. And likewise, the questions from SMR asking about gender identity and sexual orientation are very clear that you do not want to capture that in countries where it's illegal to be a particular category. So we need to be very conscious of what data we collect, and that's a privacy issue and a safety issue where we need to be cognizant of what are the dangers in this country versus that country, and so on.
That's where your codes and guidelines come in.
They do if they're international. There are problems applying a national code to other people's countries.
Actually, on that note, actually, ISO 20252 is going through a review process. So the new standard will be out in 2026, but there are working groups involved, and one of which is an AI stream as well.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, and they started even before the review process. So this is after the SMR Congress in September. An AI group was formed to look into it to see what changes need to be included in that ISO. So actually, to DJ's point, who's now gone, if you are looking for a sample provider, if you're worried about quality and processes, I think start with an ISO mark first.
Good point.
But yeah, thanks everyone.
So we're at sort of the end of the time. I'm sure if there was one last question, but I feel like we may have circled back to kind of a good conclusion. Claudio, was there anything else you wanted to add to finish it off? Being as this topic was your choice of topic for Privacy Day.
Yes, I'm really happy. I'm really happy that we managed to have this conversation, and we will have another one. So if you're brave and want to go double, just please do it. No, I'm really happy. Thanks for everyone who participated. Please download the 22 questions documents. Comment as much as you want. You still have a chance to share your ideas and influence the document if you wish. And thanks everyone again for participating.
Yeah, thanks so much, Claudio. Thanks, Gabby, for organising it, and thanks everyone for participating. This is probably one of the most chatty one of these sessions I've been to, so that's fantastic. And I think, Gabby, people can still sign up for the second session. I think it's in my calendar at something like 2 a.m. So for Australians, it may be too late, but there are some people from time zones here that would be better placed to make that one. So thanks, everyone. And we'll see you back at another one of these in the coming months. There's a number set up throughout the year, and they're actually all in the SMR calendar. So if you want to get organised for 2024, you can sign up to all of the AI community circles. So I hope to see you all at something like this again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank
you
you.
all.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.